Velkommen tilbage til verdensmålsugen, både til jer, som ser med online, og til jer, som er kommet her i går. Værsgo og find en plads til de sidste af jer, der ikke har gjort det endnu. Den næste debat, den er arrangeret af Nordisk Ministerråd under overskriften Enabling the Digital Green Transition. Og det er Nynne Bjerre, som styrer slagets gang, så jeg vil egentlig bare give ordet til dig, Nynne. Værsgo.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to this meeting. Welcome to you joining us online. This meeting is in English because we broadcast to the Baltic region as well as the Nordics. So, as was said, my name is Nynne Bjerre Christensen. On behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers, I'm going to host this session where the potentials, the barriers, the challenges related to a digital green transition in the Nordic and the Baltic region are going to be discussed. So let me just tell you a little bit about the session. It starts off with a presentation to the key findings and recommendations in the report just released recently called Enabling the Digital Green Transition in the Nordic and Baltic countries. And that is a report coming from this house, Tænketanken mandag morgen. And then during the first hours, we are going to be joined by experts who are already in the room listening eagerly to what's going on the stage, and they will and they'll discuss clearly the recommendations and try to shed some lights on the recommendations and the challenges related to them. So they're going to pick their favorites, and we're going to discuss that afterwards. Why is this relevant during a Sustainable Development Goals Week? Well, that is because a great deal of the Sustainable Development Goals are only possible to reach if digital innovation is being applied big time. In the second part of the session, because this session goes on for 2 weeks, or 2 weeks, well, it's only 2 hours, luckily enough, I think, after all. But for the next hour, going on from 2 onwards, we're going to zoom in on one of the recommendations, and that is open green data. And then we invite new panelists to the stage in order to zoom in on that topic and give us some ideas how to utilize green open data. But I'm going to get back to that later at 2 o'clock. So, as you all know, we'll be happy to hear from you in this room or you joining us online. We'd like to hear questions and comments from you all the way through. If you write to us online, then the questions are coming here on my iPad, and I'll be happy to forward them to the panelists, so please join the discussion. And I'm going to save at least last 10 minutes for questions from you in the audience and you coming or joining us online. So please send in all the questions and comments you have as we go along. But first, let's have a look at the report, as I mentioned earlier, the report and the recommendations coming from mandag morgen. So please welcome Christian Ingemann, Project Director here at mandag morgen, and Kasper Valdemar, Analyst at mandag morgen. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Nynne. Let me just start off by saying how very excited and happy we are to finally be able to present this study, which we have been working on for the better part of a year. So it's also exciting on our part to be able to share these results with you. Could I just get the first slide behind me here? Thank you. So basically, let me just start off by, I guess, trying to zoom in on what is the real topic that we've tried to study here, the digital green transition. What does that even mean? It's not self-evident. Well, we have applied a working definition for this study, and it's basically that we're looking at societal changes towards a greener or low-carbon society driven by technological innovations. So this, I think one thing that's worth noting in that regard is that we're looking at broader societal transitions. So we're not looking at specific product innovation or specific project taking on or going on locally. We're looking at what can actually drive a broad societal transition driven by technology towards an environmental sustainable future. So the study consists of three main parts. I'll just sort of elaborate shortly on this. The first part is a policy analysis or a policy mapping. We've been looking at policies that relate to digital innovation or digital strategies and policies relating to environmental sustainability. And we've looked across the EU and especially across the Nordic and Baltic countries for national policies in these areas. And then we've done an analysis to look at to what degree are these digital policies and environmental policies integrated. To what degree can we see that specific policies have a direct and in-depth focus on how we can apply technology to pursue environmental goals? And the main conclusion is that the general degree of integration is quite low. Actually, we've found that only about 3% of the total policies that we've looked at have sufficient, we would say, or in-depth integration of these two areas. So there is, by all means, a policy lag, if you will. There are definite political ambitions and a lot of political rhetoric in this area, but until now, there is a policy lag, and we are hoping that the study can also be a motivator for political decision makers to actually develop adequate policies in this area to further the development or accelerate the digital green transition, if you will. That was the first part. The second part of the study, we'd go in depth, look at the Nordic and Baltic countries to see what are the main drivers of this transition, what are the main barriers, which strength positions can we identify, and how can we learn from each other in these areas. Building on that, we end the study by narrowing in on policy recommendations. We identify 5 crucial policy areas that are open for innovation, if you will. We have consulted about 148 stakeholders or experts across the Nordic and Baltic countries to help us qualify and prioritize these policy recommendations. And we end up with 10 policy recommendations, 2 for each policy area. And that's basically what we want to elaborate on for the last part of this short presentation. So let's move on. So Kasper, take us through the first policy drive here.
Yes, our first policy drive is all about improving the value and use of open green data. And when we talk about open green data, we basically mean data that's freely available to use, it's non-personal, and it's easily accessible for businesses and science, and also just in general society at large. And when we conducted our study, we found that, as I think you also mentioned, Christian, many of the countries in the Nordic-Baltic region, they might have a strategy for digitalization or open data even, but and also have data portals where they try to sort of like centralize and gather open data. But the data is often poor quality. It's often in a variety of formats, and it's often old, and there are data breaches, data's missing. So our first recommendation when we looked at this topic was that we need to develop common standards for presenting and sharing data, and also to address the issue of old and also irrelevant data on all the platforms. We believe we could do more to encourage and incentivize, especially private actors, to share data on the platforms, because a lot of the relevant data, open green data, is actually held by private actors, but they have no incentive to share it. It's time and resources. And the second policy drive is about supporting innovation within the digital green transition, and also being able to scale solutions. And our recommendations, they actually build on something that you probably already know about, most of you, and that we already have a strong tradition for here in the Nordic region, and that's triple helix collaboration. So collaboration between scientists, governments, and businesses to develop new solutions, and also to support incubators and accelerators, to support SMEs and also startups. And even though we have a lot of these, a strong institutional setup in the Nordic-Baltic region and across all the countries already, we found that when we looked into it, only very few of them actually supported the digital green, or had a digital green focus, or digital green startups in their portfolio, and so forth. And the third policy drive And that's also another important enabler for the digital green transition, is having relevant skills in the labor force. And even though both in, here in Denmark, but also across all the Nordic Baltic countries, we have generally a high skill level in the labor force and high educational attainment levels. When we looked at it, we actually found that we don't have many digital green university programs, say. So that's also one of our recommendations. Maybe universities could start developing programs that integrate the digital and green. But also, if we look at it more broadly, we not only need specialists for the digital green transition, we also need the populace or the labor force in general to have the relevant skills. And for this, we found that we could use adult training and education schemes. And again, many of the countries in the Nordic Baltic region, they have strategies in this area. They also have educational offers for adults, but they often don't combine the digital and green. And there were very few digital educational offers, actually, or offers within digital skills.
All right. That was the 3 of the 5 policy drives. So let's look at policy drive 4, and that's about putting green public procurement first. In welfare states in the like the Nordic countries, public spending obviously has a big role and can be a driving factor for a lot of societal changes. So one way of looking at this is that we can apply green public spending, or procurement, if you will, to accelerate this transition. We can do it at least for 2 reasons. One of them being that we can lower the negative environmental impact of public processes and institutions and their impact on society. But we can also incentivize the private market to develop digital green solutions, if you will, if we can apply criteria and the right kind of motivation, for example, through public tenders. So our recommendations in this area would be that we actually establish a national platform, if you will, that can support, advise, share best practices, share tools for green public procurers on a local level. So have this kind of sort of knowledge support and distribution of best practice would be a strong driver in this area. And we can see different kinds of platforms across the Nordic and Baltic countries that are doing some of this and having quite some success in that degree. So a recommendation on our part would be that let's do that all across the Nordic and Baltic countries, and let's have that as a direct focus for policy innovation. And the second policy recommendation in this area about green public procurement would be that we need to set some standards at a national level. We need to have formal criteria that are not only nice to have, but are actually necessary and are a formal part of the public procurement processes. So we need standards, we need criteria, but we also need some kind of systematic revision of what's actually going on, because until now, many of these public procurement policies only recommend that local public procurers, for example, self-assess how they are performing within different product criteria. And I think we need to move beyond this sort of self-assessment to a more systematic revision, and so more systematic and formal targets in this area. So that would be a recommendation on our part. And the last policy drive relates to not something different, but something that in many areas sort of covers all of the different policy drives, and that's the smart city area. Because a lot of the digital green projects that we are looking at when we research the Nordic and Baltic countries in some way relate to a smart city platform or a smart city project, or smart city strategy, if you will. And one of the recommendations, or what we found when we looked at a lot of these cases, is that there are a lot of different smart city strategies. Some of them are very ambitious, but many of them don't really deliver in the end. And that has something to do with how they're organized, or even how they're developed and designed from the beginning. Many of them are designed and managed within sort of within one single public authority, within one single institution. So they lack being founded cross-institutionally and also managed and committed across public institutions, and often it creates some kind of institutional silo or lock-in, and that can be a definite barrier for actually delivering value through these smart city projects. So the last recommendation would also be to design these projects by identifying all the different stakeholders in the value chain and bringing them on board in the initial phases of the project and not after the project is to be delivered or finalized. So having them on board and identifying what role they can play and creating a sort of common commitment across the value chain is crucial in this area. So that was the last of our sort of 10 formal recommendations. You can read a lot more about this in the report. This is probably more confusing than enlightening, but this is just to give an example that we're not only studying policies on a sort of macro level here, we're also saying that there are different, I don't even know if you can see this, like that. There are definite areas of policy innovation, but there are also a lot of very inspiring projects around the Nordic and Baltic countries, and we sort of relate that in the sort of a synergy mapping in the report. So explore the report, and you will also be inspired by a lot of different digital green projects relating to the different policy areas. So by all means, get hold of the report and study these interesting initiatives. That was it for our part, and I think we'll just hand over the rest of the debate to you, Nina.
Thank you very much, Christian. But could I just have a quick question before you leave? Because I'd like to ask you which one of the recommendations you sort of see holds the biggest potential for innovation, maybe even entrepreneurship. Do you have? Well, it's difficult. It's like Sophie's Choice, right? You have 10 recommendations, but which one do you fancy the most?
If I were to reply, I would definitely say, and lucky for all of us, I would say open green data, because we're discussing this in the second session of our afternoon program here. So I would say that holds such big potentials, because we already have a lot of the groundwork done. We are already collecting and identifying relevant data. We are getting there with developing the right platforms and so on, but there is much more that can be done, and it holds such large value for our communities, but also across regions and across institutions. So that would be my answer.
What about you, Kasper? Will you go with the open green data as well?
I have to be boring and agree.
Yeah, okay. Well, gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And as Christian and Kasper just said, the report has just been released, and at least you joining us online can find the link to the report in the chat, so if you want to take a look at it straight away, you can do that. So now I'd like to welcome our panelists going to look into the recommendations. Kian Steenkjær Hein, she's a GovTech expert and managing consultant at PA Consulting. Welcome to the stage. Nina Aagaard, Chief Operating Officer, Nordic Innovation. Astrid Herdis Jacobsen is a Senior Digital Development Expert at the World Bank. And then joining us online, at some point anyway, is Helena Sareen, joining us from Finland. She is Head of Carbon Neutral Finland Mission with Business Finland. And roughly halfway through the debate, in 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to be joined by Christian Tangene. He's an advisor in Norway at the Norwegian Knowledge Hub for Green Public Procurement. So he's going to talk to that recommendation as well. And he's joining us from Norway. So we're going to see him later on. Helena, we can see you now. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you. So, ladies, just a few reflections on the report. Maybe you can just reflect on where you see the biggest potentials for innovation and entrepreneurship lies, and maybe also whether there is a potential of the combination between digitization and green transition that has not yet been redeemed. Kian, will you begin?
Yes, I would. I think that the combination actually of the recommendation regarding startups or hubs and then the public procurement, I would say it was GovTech. That would be my recommendation, to do more of that, to use the public spending muscle in order also to drive a green transition.
Yeah. Nina, go ahead.
Thank you. I think the open data, as mentioned, it's a kind of, we need to have that in order to have interoperability. I think that's also very important. And of course, because I come from the Nordic collaboration, so I say the collaboration across borders and sectors. I think that's very important.
So also some knowledge sharing.
Knowledge,
across
education
the
in
borders.
every recommendation, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Astrid?
Yeah, I think it's great recommendations because they aim at establishing the necessary enablers, and they are targeted towards this specific context. I work at the World Bank, where we are supporting developing countries in implementing their national determined contributions, and we of course looking at best practices. And I think this exemplifies best practice because the Nordic Baltic region is a front runner for digital development and green. Of course, open data is a prerequisite for digital green transition, but so is funding and technological innovation and so forth. So I think it's, I could choose innovation or open data if I only had two choices.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Astrid. Helena, you've had a look at the report too. What do you fancy the most?
Okay, that's a very, very difficult question. But generally speaking, I'm of the opinion that this report has managed very nicely to bring up difficult subjects. And the transformation from nice to have into need to have is one of the key statements throughout the whole report. And from our perspective, we published here at Business Finland some time ago, together with Technology Finland, a white paper on digitalization and electrification. And there we can seize the digitalization's potential to help reduce global carbon emissions by up to 15%, which is a huge amount. And now the question lies how these potentials can become into reality. And this report gave some insight, some suggestions to that one. But if I had to select maybe a little bit out of the suggestions, is that I would emphasize the capabilities in understanding the disruptions thoroughly. So this means that it's vital on all levels: policymakers, public sectors, businesses, researcher communities, as well as investors. So that would be my choice.
Okay, so Helena, it looks like you're moving within the field of fund digital green collaborators and incubators, because that sort of holds some of the cooperation or the collaboration between academia, public, private sector, policymakers, and so on.
Well, one way or another, yes, I could say that one. So it's vital to understand at the moment the disruptions very thoroughly, because no one can pretty much solve the challenges alone. These are so huge and humongous challenges we're facing at the moment. And definitely there is room for Nordic Baltic cooperation in this respect. And it's highly important that we include all different kind of cross-cutting solutions for energy, manufacturing, agriculture and land use, buildings, transportation, traffic and other sources. And that is something where we can very much cooperate more into details on Nordic and Baltic level. And if I may continue still, it is highly important that we shorten the path from innovations to investments and the reality, and try to implement the new innovations on a faster pace and on a larger scale as well.
Okay, Helena, thank you very much. As I told you on the phone when we spoke earlier, just raise your hand because I can see you if you want to join the debate. Can we talk, before diving into the recommendations, can we talk a bit about the potential? Because, Astrid, do you think we are at a point where we are actually technically ready to sort of harness the potential of digitization?
I think the report shows that we are not. Because it really shows the lack of policy integration. And I think I was looking for recommendation on how governments can drive this policy change. The role of government in transitioning to low carbon economy. How can the governments establish operating model for green transition? With all the sufficient enablers, not only data, but also infrastructure to drive the transition from strategy to execution. So I think digital government and green operating models for digital is required, and that's something that could be expanded on in the next report.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very important perspective. And also, secondly, how to scale up those promising use cases.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing the 50% reduction of CO2 emissions from this smart energy algorithm. What if we applied that at a much larger scale? So I think we all know of excellent use cases and projects with a lot of potentials, but how to scale them up, how to diffuse them across countries, I mean, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And
So what's holding us back?
I think there's the lack of policy integration. It says it's difficult to establish cooperation across professional silos in government. So I think interoperability is a key word. It's not only about data, but it's also about cooperation, institutions, innovation ecosystems. So I think establishing interoperability is very important.
Yeah. So Nina, you work with Nordic Innovation and you're used to working across borders. What do you think about Astrid's argument here that she says it's really difficult to share the use cases and scale them?
Well, actually, I fully agree and continue also what Helena said. I think, you take up a very important thing about this system-level innovation that we need to have in place in order to move on to next level. So I fully agree this report is very important and highlights many good points, but we have to think a level up and integrate different aspects. And I really like that you take the interoperability as also beyond the data and to our systems and policies and policy regulative work that we need to do in everywhere in the society. But having a different kind of strategies, like we work a lot with the circular economy thinking as an economic strategy, not only as a material efficiency. And we work a lot with the cities. So now when we come back to the smart cities and the public sector as an enabler, and I think that we also have to face that we need to take the responsibility as a public service and get something done with the public procurement and the collaboration in and between cities and the sectors, and then how we budget, how we think the financings around our societies. So it is a very huge questions and topics, but I think that if we put our forces together and be creative in our thinking, we can do that. It's a repurposing many of our existing structures.
Well, I promise when Christian is joining us from Norway, then we're going to dive into the procurement issue and discuss, also how risk adverse the public sector should be, because I guess there's a limit to that too. So Nina, when the report states, we need national standards, we need targets and so on, do you agree with that? Is that the way forward to push the agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell that we have this one very concrete demonstration that if the governments, they are bold enough to set some targets that are beyond what we can call realistic. So Norwegian government, they had this goal for electric aviation. And what happened when they set the goal? A lot of innovation came up, a lot of different kind of actors started to collaborate, and even the big ones that normally are in fierce competition, they wanted to join the forces. So I think if we set the goals from the public sector bold enough, then we will get also results that we can't even imagine.
Well, I mean, we have a 70% emission agenda in Denmark, and that definitely has pushed a lot of discussion. And whether it's actually pushing businesses ahead, I don't know, but I think it does. Kian, what do you think about this agenda? Standards, targets, is that the way to go in order to push both the public sector and the private part?
Yes, I think definitely that the public sector can be a big driver in this, but I think also that we should be a little bit careful of having a checklist where we can check off. instead of looking into how deep are we actually going with this transformation, so that it's into the inner works of government that we are transforming things. Mind you that the public sector is a big spender, so they run hospitals, they run roads, they run everything in our society, so they need to be able to transition themselves in the way that they do their operation, not only to buy green, to buy greener pencils or buy greener paper or something like that. It has to go deeper. So I think that it might, knowing the government a little bit from working from within for 20 years, it could end up in a checklist. Are we green enough? But it's not about just buying green, it's about enabling a thorough green transformation of the public sector as a driver. It could also be like the hybrid projects that the government could fund, like the energy island that the Danish government now is trying to build, because they have the muscle to do stuff like that.
Yeah. And they're actually, it is a risky business, and we're going to be a first mover there. Astrid and Helena afterwards.
Yeah, I think we need also to think of the global dimension, global cooperation, global value chains, not only regional in the Baltic Nordic regions. How to develop partnerships with developing countries across the value chains. We live in a globalized world, so our climate action should think of that. And I think also we need to think more on how to engage citizens, because the technological part is maybe not the most difficult. We need to engage citizens in the real life dilemmas of low carbon transitions. And I think the report is very excellent, because it's testing the conclusions with a wide number of stakeholders. But I think when we move along the low carbon pathways, we also need to think of cultural change, behavioral change, leadership, and so forth. And technology might not be the most difficult part. So we can not only rely on standards, we also need to engage with the citizens.
But do you think that a change of culture can come from above, if you have like the 70% target, etc., or the national targets or standards? Do you think that can sort of push a change amongst the population, or do you think it needs to grow from the bottom?
I think it's the change is policy driven, but it needs to engage everyone to be fair and just, and to maximize synergies and handle the trade-offs.
Okay,
so I think, yeah, we need to engage a citizen-centric low carbon pathway.
Okay. Christian, I can see you joined us now from Norway. It's a great pleasure to have you here. We're going to look into the procurement issue just in a short while, but I promised Helena the word beforehand.
Okay, thank you. Before going to my comment to procurement, I just comment on this behavioral stuff which was brought up, and I think that's highly important. And I just read a very interesting study from the IEA. So mostly about the consumers and companies, when they are talking about behavioral change, it comes from the regulation. So it was something like less than 20% or so comes from free-willing actions they are going to take. But however, this is one of the crucial topics, is the behavioral change. But then going to the procurement stuff, and 2 points here. So firstly, about the procurement and new innovations. So it's pretty much always in the case when we are talking about new innovations, they are more risky. They can be technological risks, they can be economical risks, or so forth. So how to make this change happen? And we are not talking only about the Nordics and the Baltic area. And I really like the idea of having the global viewpoint in this one, as in order to keep us on the net zero path by 2050, like in the energy field, we definitely need to have the emerging markets with us in this development. So how to implement new innovations with the more speeding up that process. So that was one point. And the second one is that I see the decision-makers' role as very, very important as enablers. I'm a little bit hesitant from that perspective that politicians make the selections of technologies, because especially at the moment with these large disruptions, probably nobody has the crystal ball and sees what kind of future is in 30 years time or so, and can bet really on the winning technologies as such. So the role of politicians and policies is pretty much, I see, as an enabler. Make new innovations flourish, enable test beds, enable sandboxes where new solutions and innovations can be tested in as much in a real environment as possible. So those were my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helena. So let's dig into the recommendation related to procurement. And that basically is an issue around how the public sector and the public sector muscle, as Kian called it earlier, can be used to push the green transition. Christian Tankene, as I said earlier, you are advisor to Grønne Anskaffelser, which is the Norwegian knowledge hub for green public procurement. So this is actually at the heart of what you do. Can you just to give us an idea of where you see the potential, can you tell us just a little bit about how tech and digitization can be used to make procurement greener?
Yes, and thank you so much for inviting me to this debate. We just launched in Norway the new action plan for more green and innovative procurement. And in this, we set up 10 different points, which also are very much similar to the points in the report. Measuring is one part. It's very important to have a better understanding of the actual climate and also other environmental impacts of public procurement. Today, we don't have the exact numbers on this. So that's one part that we want to improve when we are going towards 2030, and there digitalization is key. We are developing now a program related to artificial intelligence, where we use artificial intelligence to analyze invoices to see what is actually being procured, not only what is like the estimated value of a contract, but what do the different municipalities procure. And then digital technology is essential here. And then some of the other parts that we want to do is to include startups. And that's also in the technology sector then, where we have a focus, and we also finance collaboration between startups and public organizations. Mm-hmm. And we also guide them, the municipalities and the counties in Norway to better connect with startups. Yeah. And of course, most startups, they work on some type of digital technology that will solve a problem related to the green transition. I could talk for a long time.
I think I'm just going to play the ball back to Kian, Christian. But as I said earlier to Helena, I'm keeping an eye on you. So just raise your hand if you want to join the discussion for the last 10 minutes or so. But Kian, you're an expert within this field as well. Where do you see the biggest potential for the public sector to be able to sort of use their muscle when it comes to digitization in order to strengthen the green transition?
Yep. Actually, the Danish government too have a green strategy for buying, and when they say how much is this, they count in about 200 million Danish kroners, and that is of course a large sum, but that is only a minor part of the public spending, as I pointed to before. So what we are actually, what they have a strategy for and what they are measuring is only a smaller part of the entire public spend. So I think that should be far more ambitious and look for areas where they can make clear transformations of the way that the public sector is running their business, like running greener hospitals, building more green mobility solutions, and so on. And I think that would mean a huge change for all of us and for the entire ambition about a more green world. So that means I'm into GovTech, and in my perspective, GovTech is also green tech, and green tech is a very important part of GovTech if we want to measure this. So talking about Nordic collaboration, I think actually what could be done was to make a platform for making it more transparent. What kind of project is being run in Norway or in Sweden or in Denmark or in Finland, Iceland with success? What lessons could be learned? What kind of companies could you engage with? And so on. And I think that could make a big change across the Nordic region.
Kian, can you say a little bit about the relation between the public and the private sector in this case? We spoke about the energy island earlier, which is a test case.
Yes.
But do you think that the public sector should be first mover and should invest even though it's risky, or should we have a slightly more conservative approach? I mean, it's taxpayers' money, and in other ways try to stimulate private sector innovation.
I think definitely that public sector should be first mover in the sense that they should be ambitious, not in the sense that they should just waste taxpayers' money, indeed not. But I think if you look at the digital state of Denmark and of the Nordic region, we are where we are because the public sector has been first movers and has made a digital infrastructure, so we are all benefiting from, even the private sector. So I think definitely they should use the big muscle on behalf of all of us.
Yeah, Christian, what do you say to this challenge? Whether should private or public sector move first? Because I guess. Anyway, in some Danish municipalities, I can think of mayors who would be like, I don't want to be the first mover because it does carry a risk as well.
Yeah, I think that's one, like my department's role is to motivate this type of innovative spirit. And I definitely think that the public sector can be first mover, but also the collaboration between the public and the private sector is important. So for instance, now with the new Åpenhetsloven, as it's called in Norwegian, when it comes to social responsibility, what we can do as public procurers is to demand that the companies, they are able to track their supply chain all the way down to even like the mining of minerals, and to be sure that there's no human rights abuse all the way down there. And to do this, you need blockchain technology, and that's not something that we in the public sector then should procure in itself, but we, through demanding that from the companies, we can do that. And that's part of a collaboration to understand how we can do that efficiently.
Nina?
Yeah, I really like what Christian is saying, and actually to link what Astrid said about fairness and global aspects, and what you're saying about, actually I hear not only green but sustainable. So sustainable public sector and procurement, and sustainable cities in a sense that they are not only green but also economically and socially sustainable. So I think that's very important, and this is the way that we look at from the Nordic collaboration and especially at Nordic innovation. And earlier this week we actually had in Norway gathered our Nordic Smart City Network, 20 plus municipalities from all across the Nordics, sharing their best practices and problems and solutions, and also acting as intermediators to each other. So linking to those, making these connections between the public and private sector. And I think this is the way to go. So thank you for that comment, Christian.
Yeah. Kian and Helena afterwards.
Yeah, I think again that I have a slightly different take on public-private collaboration than Christian has, or excuse me if I'm wrong, Christian, but I think that it's about tech transfer from the private sector to the public sector and also back again. And it's about the public sector using its muscle to buy solutions from small companies, medium-sized companies, or even bigger companies, and supporting by that the private sector. A smaller company who makes a good solution for the public sector will get street credit, and it will have some power after that, so that it can expand and get even bigger. So I think that is the kind of collaboration I'm talking about, really.
Okay. And so, Helena, maybe just a quick remark before we see whether we have any questions in the audience.
Okay, I would like to continue from the last comment, and I see it pretty much in the same way as if we are looking from, for instance, this energy field, it has been stated that from the 2030 until 2050, we are lacking about 50% of the needed solutions, technologies that need to be in place in real life, in operational during that time. So there, the cities, municipalities can be one enabler as being a lucrative end client for companies and ecosystems to create solutions. So it can really be a boost in order to enhance the scaling up of new technologies and solutions by giving challenges to ecosystem, giving challenges to research communities and to the companies and businesses as well.
Okay. So here in Copenhagen, we are very close to the town hall, and the bell just rang telling me that we have 5 minutes left of the debate. So I'd like to ask if any of you do have any questions or comments for the debate. Yeah, go ahead. There's a microphone coming up for you.
Thank you. Charlotte Koch for Green Architecture. Modi in India planned 20 smart cities, but stopped after number 2 and reworked and rethought the development of the smart cities. Are you considering in the Nordic the knowledge and experience that they did there? Where they implemented a kind of a risk management board to look across, because they found out, for instance, they hadn't considered health and such things. Emergency didn't work, just as an example.
Okay, so are you thinking that maybe some of the Scandinavian examples could be used in India, or whether we should actually look into his experiences?
I mean, they already did it. And we have a company in the UK as well, so I know how long the smart city movement has been going on. My question is more, because you also talk about working internationally with cooperation. Is there a knowledge exchange going on also with these countries that have already implemented partly these things?
Thank you.
And the good and bad experiences from this, because I think that's very important.
Yeah. Okay, Esther, I don't know whether that's a question for you coming from the World Bank. Would you have any reflections on the Indian case?
I know there's a lot of exchange going on smart cities. We work, for example, closely with Korea and share their experience. I'm not, I can't answer in general what type of exchange is going on. But I think what we're discussing, we shouldn't discuss whether we should do something or not. We should discuss how we do it. What's the most efficient way? And for that, we need to exchange knowledge and best practice and learn from everyone on how to do it most efficiently and less costly and so forth.
Yeah. I guess what happens in India and China is that they build cities very quickly because they have a growing population, whereas we in the Nordic region are sort of growing slower and more organic. Helena, you had a reflection, I think, on this question as well. If we can just have a quick...
I could very briefly come to that one, and as obviously, this kind of, as was stated in the question, the smart city development has going on for years or decades with the different names, depending from who you are asking. And of course, like we are a global organization, Business Finland, we are on our part definitely collecting information, being there in the continuous discussions, for instance, in India, in China, or whichever is the country. And from the Nordic and Baltic point of view, I see our stronghold is pretty much the quality of life, and there definitely in the new cities and city development we should and could implement also the other aspects, and whether it comes from the education, health, generally the quality of life, in addition to all the infrastructural questions. So thank you.
Yeah, just a quick remark, Astrid.
I just want to add that in the future, most people will live in cities, and the main part of resource and energy consumption is taking place in an urban context. So we need smart cities very fast, and it can be done in many different ways.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are slowly coming to an end. I'd like to thank Christian Tangene and Helena Saren for joining us online from Norway and from Finland. It's been a pleasure, and with us here in Copenhagen was Astrid Herdis Jacobsen, Nina Aagaard, and Kian Stenkjær Hein. Thank you very much for joining us all.
Thank you.
And so, dear audience, we are not completely done with this issue yet, because we're going to zoom in on one of the recommendations, the question of green data and how we can harness the value of open green data. So we're just going to have a quick break here, rearrange the stage, and then we're going to come back to you at 2 o'clock.
The Nordic countries aim to become the world's most sustainable and integrated region by 2030. They are on the path, according to a new baseline report that was commissioned by the Nordic Council of Ministers. But the report also outlines a series of challenges that the countries need to resolve.
If the best pupils in the class, the Nordics, cannot do it, then how can we expect China or India or Nigeria or Ethiopia or Brazil to do it? The Nordic region must succeed if we are going to have any chance for the world to succeed.
The Nordic Council of Ministers will focus on 3 strategic priorities: a green Nordic region, a competitive Nordic region, and a socially sustainable Nordic region. We know that climate change poses a big challenge. But in addition to that, one major concern is loss of biodiversity.
We have a very high density of natural reserves and natural parks and protected areas. But still, you know, one should recognize that the Baltic Sea is one of the sickest inland oceans in the world. Overfishing, invasive species, challenges with agriculture, which still is in an unbalanced state, where we are loading more fertilizers and having larger concentration of livestock than the sustainable assessments show is at the carrying capacity.
Near the Swedish town Lund, we find the Nordic Generic Resource Centre known as Nordgen. This is a Nordic partnership that works to conserve and promote the sustainable use of genetic diversity among animals, forests and plants that are important for the Nordics.
Vi skal tænke på, at biodiversiteten er så stor en del af vores samfund. For planterne for eksempel, de giver os ilt, de giver os mad, de giver foder, og også mulighed for, at vi kan få tøj på kroppen.
We cannot claim that we have crossed the line of truly being on a pathway towards a true sustainable modern welfare. But it's a very exciting moment, because there's so much happening in the Nordic on phasing out particularly fossil fuels that I think we are really seeing a turning point. This is giving quite an exciting modern welfare future that will give many benefits in terms of well beyond environment. But we still have a lot of work to do.
The Nordics is an innovative and competitive region, but we need to work on achieving sustainable growth.
Skal vi løse problemene med videre økonomisk vekst, eller må vi tenke annerledes? Og vi vet ikke helt hva dette annerledes i så fall skal bestå i. Men vekst er jo ikke noe problem i seg selv hvis den ikke ødelegger økosystemer, ikke krever sjeldne jordmetaller, ikke legger beslag på ressurser som ikke kan resirkuleres.
One of the largest footprints in the Nordics is electronic equipment. Trends show that in the field of recycling, this might be one of the fields we can look towards when growth needs to be rethought.
Här har vi datorer som vi har köpt in, fixat upp och som är redo att återanvändas ytterligare en gång till. Och när det kommer till datorer så kommer omkring 80% av klimatutsläppen just från produktionen. Så det är viktigt att hålla dem vid liv så länge som möjligt.
Utmaningen är egentligen att få företag och organisationer att sluta slänga den gamla IT-utrustningen och istället återanvända den och därmed bli en del av det cirkulära flödet.
Vi må ta radikale grep, og vi må ikke lene oss tilbake nå, tror jeg, og tenke at det grønne skiftet vil på magisk vis ordne opp for oss. Det er en del av løsningen, men vi er nødt til å pushe på så dette skjer mye raskere.
When it comes to socially sustainability, we are very behind when looking at non-European integration into the workforce and gender inequality.
Já, svo við sjáum í rauninni, eða rannsóknir sína að megin ástæðan fyrir að við erum ennþá með þennan kynjamun á vinnumarkaði eru barneignir og í rauninni þessi ójafna verkaskipting sem að fylgir barneignum.
In the neighborhood of Vesterbro in Copenhagen, Dane Edda Hendrup and Swede Erik Stahler live together with their daughter Elma. They have managed to step outside the general statistics.
Jeg gik fra en måned før, som er en del af min ordning på arbejdet, og så havde du de første 2 uger sammen med os efter fødslen.
Ja.
Og så havde jeg barsel 10 måneder, og så havde vi jo 2 måneders overlap.
Och så hade jag ytterligare 4 månader, så 6 månader totalt.
Their cross-country situation allowed them to have a more equal time together with their daughter.
Det är fint att man må välja själv, men att det ska prioriteras och premieras. Att man som far tar barsel.
Der er en stor forskel ude på arbejdsmarkedet i forhold til ligesom muligheden for at drive karriere, og ligesom at det ikke er en hemsko, fordi det er mere naturligt, at begge parter er væk i en periode.
Ég held að Norðurlöndin eigi eftir að skara fram úr, hvort að þau eigi eftir að ná fullkomnum jöfnuði, það er kannski önnur spurning.
The Vision 2030 is ambitious, but the baseline report has shown that the Nordics still have a long way to go.
Norden ska bli världens mest integrerade och hållbara region. Vi har 8 år på oss för att uppnå visionen, så vi har ingen tid att mista. Ska vi lyckas med det, så måste hela Norden dra åt samma håll. Politiker, civilsamhälle, näringslivet, medborgare. Tillsammans är vi starkare.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome back to this lovely room. Welcome back to the stage. Welcome back to the theme. As I said earlier, we're going to zoom in on one of the recommendations. It was clearly the recommendations that Kasper and Christian had most confidence in. The recommendation they thought holds the greatest potential for innovation and for entrepreneurship. So I'm being joined here on stage by Lea Ravnkild Møller. Welcome to. Chief Consultant with the Department for Sustainability, Circular Economy and Resources at NIRAS. And Søren Skov Bording, he's Managing Director at Center Denmark. And maybe you can, both of you, explain later exactly what you do and exactly how you are in touch with these data we're going to discuss. But first I'd like to just recap what the policy recommendations are. The first one was support interoperability across platforms at the Nordic Baltic region by developing common standards for presenting and sharing green data. I think this is very central and relevant. And then create a national framework that encourages and incentivizes private sector to share data relevant to the green transition. I think that's relevant to you, Lea. We are also being joined by Jana Sinipuri. She is joining us from Finland. She is a leading specialist with the Finnish Innovation Fund, and I think Jana is very competent within this field as well. And as I told you earlier, Jana, just raise your hand if you want to join the discussion, and then I can see you, and then I'm going to quickly let you into the debate. For you joining us online for the first time, we are happy to take questions. Just write them in the chat, and I'll be able to see them here on my iPad, and I'll be happy to forward them to the panelists here on stage. And that goes for you amongst the audience as well. We're happy to take questions during the last 5 or 10 minutes. So, but you've all three promised to just make a quick pitch within this field. And maybe, Lea, will you begin?
I could, yeah. So the whole point was about how good, what's the good thing about green data?
Yes.
And one thing for sure is that if we want to fight climate change and some of the huge issues we have about sustainability, then we need to combine sustainability and digitalization and look at what green data can contribute with there, especially when it comes to mitigation, increased mobility, to the whole green procurement part. How can we encourage that, especially as a private company, and how the private company can be a driver in this as well as in the public sector. Then we have another part hasn't been mentioned that much today. That's adaptation, climate change adaptation. If we want to do welfare economic, optimal climate adaptation, we need a lot of data to do that. Meaning, how huge is a storm surge, and how much are we willing to adapt to a future storm surge, for example, comparing to what are the avoided damage costs we have when we do this. There are, of course, also bumps on the way that we see I come from a private company, we often contribute with new data points, but when we finished creating these data points, using them, have measured something for a while, then we don't need them anymore, and we that would be nice to have a solution to. Then what do we do then? Could we have somebody who could inherit our data points so we could have these time series data that are so important for the green transition? Other things is maintaining existing data point, but also to be able to sometime when you're consulting, things end up in a report, and how can the data that we gather, being in a consulting company, could come out and live and be green data that's available for people. So when we have data, then make them available somehow.
Mm-hmm. That is clearly one of the big challenges, as you say, that you do actually collect a lot of data point, data series, but then when you don't need them anymore, clearly you stop collecting them, and then And then what next? I mean, would this data be useful to anyone else, especially when it comes to climate changes? Clearly, because what you do is, I mean, as a consultant within engineering, you do a lot of different stuff, but there's a lot of water involved.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in the Danish situation, there's a lot of water coming from everywhere. That water. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Leah. I'm going to get back to you. Søren Boarding, maybe you can start explaining us what Center Denmark do, because you're actually a bit at the center of the stage in this case, because you're able to collect some of the data that is relevant here. So maybe you can begin with that and then make your pitch afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, should I start with Center Denmark? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just explain a little bit about what you do at Center Denmark.
Yeah. So Center Denmark is developing a digital infrastructure to support the green transition. So yeah, it's kind of something about what we are talking about here. We have three elements in this infrastructure. The first element is fetching data. So fetching data from district heating, from wastewater treatment, from water supply, from gas system, and from electricity system, and put them all together, both from production side and consumption side of these sectors. So it is what we are talking, when we talk about sector coupling, it is sector coupling on data, putting all these data sets in one common platform, where we fetch it, we clean the data, we aggregate it, we anonymize it, maybe we add value correlating with weather data or PBR data, or it could be from Danish statistics or whatnot. And then we put it for disposal for anyone that wants to be more data-driven in their development. It could be public organizations, it could be private companies, utility companies, whoever that are in a need for data for their purposes. That is the first element. The second element is giving access to digital tools. So control algorithms, forecast models, and whatnot that is developed by universities. It can be developed by private companies, where from our infrastructure you can actually execute these forecast models and get a signal back, and you can use it for your further development. The third element is to be honest, this is something that we are still working on. We are not there yet, but we are working on improving or maturing some living laboratories, where when you have developed a new solution, you can actually test it in a water system, in a wastewater treatment plant, or where in a district heating network, or whatever algorithm or solutions you have developed. So you can have it tested in a representative setup, so that when you have it and when you go into the market with it, it's also scalable. Mm-hmm. So Center Denmark is delivering a full value chain development platform for data, for digital tools, a test environment, so that anybody can be more digital and data-driven in their development. And just to emphasize it, Center Denmark is not developing any of these solutions. We are just providing the infrastructure so other can develop these solutions. So that is what Center Denmark do.
Okay, so in case Leah had a set of data which was coming from NIOS and was, written in a program that was not accessible for anyone, then you would actually be able to clean this data, wash this data, and make it accessible to anyone.
Yeah, so we are using a technology that is called Data Lake, which is very appropriate to get data from a lot of different formats and qualities and sizes and so on. Where we have this, you can call it a washing machine, and then we can wash it and put it for disposal in a clean format and quality that is the same for every data set.
Okay.
And that is very important also for if we take electricity data. The electricity sector is quite good at putting and handling their data. They have a long history for it. But other sectors, and not to offend anyone, but if we go out to, I believe we have 2,500 water companies in Denmark.
Yeah.
Some are very large, but some are very small organizations,
owned.
and they, of course, doesn't have the competences or the resources to put many huge effort into data management. So there we can get data in a lot of different formats and qualities.
Yeah.
So this washing machine is actually very important.
Okay, so what we're going to discuss later on is, okay, what is the potential within this data for entrepreneurs, for innovators, and so on? But Leah, you have a quick remark?
Yeah, I was just like, so you actually avoid what we normally say crap in, crap out, but you get crap in, quality out.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Søren, do you have anything to add when it comes to the recommendations?
Yeah, it's all written in the report. I think it's very important that we set data free, and we, from a political hands, make a push and legally incentivizes not only electricity sector but also the other energy sectors, wastewater treatment, water supply, district heating not least, and gas sector, to also set data free.
Yeah.
It's important that we have all energy sectors in one common, independent, neutral platform where we can share data for the purposes of the green transition.
Okay, and then maybe later we can discuss whether it should actually be free or whether it should come with a price. But that's another discussion. I want to go to Finland now because Jana, you prepared a pitch for us too. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And greetings from Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. I've been working a long time with data and analytics, and I think I really appreciated this report and this fact that actually we are speaking a little bit about the new policy innovations or need for policy innovations. Circularity and this twin transition needs cross-sectoral data sharing, so interoperability, making sense of data, making it into reusable form. I think that's very important. And we also get support from the European Commission in the Data Governance Act and all those topics. What I was a little bit, or basically my viewpoint comes from the GaiaX initiative. And I've been working a lot with European colleagues around these data spaces thinking, working together with team data spaces in defining how should Europe build these single markets or open data, wider, more inclusive access to data regardless of where it comes from. And I think the twin transition has exceptionally high potential for this data sharing and also need for data sharing. So I think our European colleagues as well are lacking this good drive we have in the Nordic countries, high degree of digitalization, good resources of data, maybe this common policy ground, making this a strength for the Nordic countries. But I think we are still a little bit too little in those negotiating tables defining about digital sovereignty and how to create those European data spaces. So that's maybe my point, that we should be maybe looking a little bit, even when speaking about the Nordics, there's a lot that we can learn and also a lot that we can give to our European colleagues in this field.
Yeah. Jana, do you think we should have some common standards within the EU when it comes to quality of data, platforms and so on?
I think we need to have a high-level standards agreed, common European, because if you think about traceability, it can't really be a country-specific or region-specific. You need to be able to track create material passports, and that's a global topic. You need to be able to that comes to the policies and funding mechanisms, it comes to the data spaces and platforms. So it's huge topics. So I think we need to have a little bit broader focus when talking about interoperability.
Okay, so Søren mentioned even in Denmark, even in a small country like Denmark, we have 2,500 water plants, and some of them are very small and privately owned. So do you have similar problems in Finland, that you get lots of different data sets? I mean, even in very well-organized economies like the Danish and the Finnish, you have challenges like this. But do you recognize that from Finland?
Yeah, absolutely. It's maybe there are APIs, but they are not reusable. They are not like interoperable. So there's a little bit this high level of standardization still lacking, so that we could connect these different data points or different organizations, entities, the data together. But it's also a little bit about reusability of the data, so it's not so intuitive. So there are good examples like where the public data has been opened, but it's not really in well understandable format. So there are many topics in like building more skills on data interpretation and benefiting from the data.
Okay. So I'd like to discuss the potential because, I mean, this is about innovation. This is how we can sort of simulate growth in the private sector, amongst other things. We spoke about the public sector earlier, but I'd like to focus on the private sector here. I mean, what is the potential, Søren, from the data sets you get, you wash, put into your washing machine, it gets out on the other side, clean, nice, and intuitive, as Jana said. What can this data be used for? I mean, what's the general idea? What is the potential?
Oh, there are huge potentials for different, for all the energy sectors. And I can maybe going a bit up in the helicopter, we have this big issue in the energy system. In Denmark, if we focus in on Denmark, last year we switched off wind turbines for 1,460 gigawatt hours of production. So the wind was blowing, but we didn't have any to consume the energy. Hence, we asked the owners of the wind turbines to shut down their production of the of production from the turbines.
So we're shutting green electricity down.
Yes, and just to put it into some perspectives here, it adds up to 10% of the total energy production capacity we have in Denmark that we cut off from zero emission electricity, because we didn't have data-driven solutions that can start up some consumption in these time periods instead of downward regulating production.
Yeah. Can you actually hear what we're saying? Okay, excellent. Okay, Jana, we have a lot of rain here in Copenhagen, and we have like a cover over us, and it's very noisy. But apparently the audience can still hear us. So let's just continue. So Søren, if we had, but it's difficult for Søren to hear me. But if we had the data in that case, what could we have used the 10 or 15% for? The 10 or 15% green energy, green electricity that had been shut down. What could we have used it for if we had known better?
Yeah, so what we would like is to, instead of closing down production, we would like to upward regulate some consumption in these time periods. And that could be where we have flexibilities. So that could be district heat pumps in the district heating sector. Yeah. It can be accumulated wastewater in the wastewater sector. There are a lot of different areas and in the other energy sectors where we have flexibility that we would like to unlock. So control when to postpone consumption in district wastewater treatment, for instance, and accumulate wastewater. And when the wind is starting to blow, then we can start up the consumption and clean the water.
So maybe instead of turning off the heat in our houses during nighttime, maybe that is actually at nighttime that we should heat our houses, because that is when the wind is blowing. So, but this does have some crossover functions into the smart city discussion, right? Yeah, because sure. It's also a question of actually having the framework to be able to distribute the energy at the right time.
Yeah, for sure. The vision would be that at any given weather-driven production scenario that we have, we can optimize how we distribute the consumption across all energy sectors. Yeah. So that we can utilize the wind turbines and solar plants as best possible. Mm-hmm.
So Lea, do you have any ideas as to how you would be able to use the data coming from NEOS? As you said, you're very much into to climate change, water, etc. Can you see that other entrepreneurs could make use of these data points if it was accessible to them?
Well, you could say there could be maybe new energy sources in wave energy if you have better data on the amount of wave we get, for example. But I could also just say that we could benefit from the data that CERN has when we have to make models of whatever some of my colleague engineers. Actually, I'm not an engineer, don't tell anyone. But they can make models, and they will need this continuous data flow from CERN to verify if their models are correct, and we will need that. So even though we might make a model today, we also need the data tomorrow to see if the model continues to be relevant in the future that we look into, because we can't just assume that we will just use 50% more energy 10 years from now. Because we develop all the time, things change. We get smarter solutions that use less power. How houses get smarter, we get better isolation, etc. So we will definitely continuously need the data source to optimize the models that we make as a consulting or engineer company to develop areas of housing or industries. Whatever we develop a lot of stuff. But it's more like to put it into context of what CERN has and what I need.
Yeah, exactly. Jana and CERN afterwards.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in the smart cities and this procurement part. So we think a lot about public agencies, the purchasing power, and they are thinking their purchasing strategies and data relating to those purchases, but not really thinking using the negotiating power for building public data sets and demanding that all these services and smart city infrastructure that generates data, that data should be in reusable form. So I think that's a very important point, that we don't really have this thinking in our minds yet, that actually all digitalization also brings in a lot of data that can be used to benefit entrepreneurs and innovations.
Yeah.
And I think public procurement is extremely important here.
So Jana, I asked CERN if he could give us some sort of tangible examples as to how these data sets can be used for entrepreneurs, and you work with the Finnish Innovation Fund, so you must be a lot into this. Can you give us some ideas as to how the data can be used, just to give us some brief idea of the potential?
There's so many. I think the most straightforward is, of course, this traceability and creating visible and transparency over the whole information sharing network of value chain, and then building different scenarios based on that data. But I don't know. We've been building a pilot cases where you take this air pollutioning data, combine it to your health records, and check the weather forecast to get the optimal timing when you go for jogging. Or so in smart city context, there's so many things that influence your well-being and are also relevant to the open public sector data. So it's hard to give. As I said, there's so many.
Okay, so as long as you have some fantasy and imagination, it should be easy to find a way of life there. Søren?
Yeah, so a tangible case could be, and it could also lead to a suggestion for the legal framework. I would suggest that we put our taxes and tariffs for the electricity up on CO2 emissions instead of what is done today. And my example is in Denmark we have the culture for we normally lower temperature in public buildings during nighttime. But we also see heating of our building stock is more and more electrified by heat pumps. So during nighttime, we can have a weather-driven scenario, production scenario, where the wind is blowing. So we have maybe zero CO2 in the grid from the production of the electricity. So instead of lowering temperature in all the public buildings, or maybe also private buildings or whatnot, we should heat up the building instead during nighttime. And then when the children come into school in the morning, it will be nice and warm, maybe 24, 25 degrees, I don't know. And then during daytime, we can lower the temperature to normal temperature. Then effectively, we will actually have been consumed more electricity. So there is no incentive in the framework we have today for the school to do so, because they will have a higher billing for their electricity. But effectively, they will have udledt less CO2 emission, but consumed more electricity.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a lack of incentives here. Søren, you had some good examples with electricity, but you mentioned in the beginning wastewater, gas systems, district heating, and so on. Can you give us some ideas as to how we could use data coming from these sectors?
Yeah, so we have concrete...
There may be new entrepreneurs in the room.
Sorry?
There may be new entrepreneurs in the room eager to hear about the possibilities.
Yeah, so in the district heating sector, we have a concrete example from DTU, where we, by data-driven algorithms, we can actually optimize the forward temperature. And the estimation is that if we scale these data-driven solutions and put it into a commercial setting and sell this as a solution for the district heating companies, they can actually save 800 million Danish kroner a year in cost saving in district heating plants. So a piece of this could be your earnings as entrepreneurs developing and selling this solution.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, Lea, do you think there might be a business case for you, because you often use geodata and a lot of other data, but do you think there might be a startup potential for parts of NIOS here, if Søren can deliver the washed data easy to use?
I definitely think so, because, we have to do some calculations. Yeah. But of course, we have a data platform where we offer we gather a lot of free data, because a lot of the data is on different platforms, so we gather it in one a tool where our clients can access it. And I could imagine a situation where the information or the data we get for Miljøportalen or whatever could be combined with the data Søren has in that tool, actually. And you could see new solution, like Jana talked about, like what's the weather forecast comparing with the air condition and maybe the intensity of traffic, and you would get a good idea if I should go running today or I postpone it for tomorrow.
I think we should postpone it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, Lea, as a private sector actor, what would it take for you to actually provide these data? Because at the moment, there is not much incentive for you to provide other actors, maybe even public sector actors, with your data, because your data sets may be very specific for a specific task that you've solved, and it may be usable to someone, but it's difficult to say how and when.
Yeah.
So what's the incentive for you to share the data?
I think the incentive for us to share these data could just be that somebody would pay us to present them. It's very simple, because if we go out and put a logger in a creek, figuring out what's the water level comparing to how much does it rain, apparently a lot today, and then you can see what's the flow down to the river, and that's nice info to have if you have to develop a new housing area. We actually have a case where a Danish consulting company have this data gathered. And the only thing we need when we have these different data, for example, we build a house and we do data on the underground, the only thing that we like just somebody who pays us to maintain that data, to maintain that logger, and if we had that, if we get paid for that, we do it.
You'd be happy to?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So then the recommendations are open green data, emphasizing the open. So the question is, Søren, should data be free to everyone, or should we put a fee on some of them in order for Lea's NIAS to have an incentive to actually standardize and keep the data up to speed, so we don't get all these incomplete data sets written in all different kinds of languages?
No, in my opinion, data shouldn't necessarily be free. It could come with a fee, and as Lea indicates, it requires actually quite a lot of effort to maintain these data sets and put them together and make sure it has the right format and quality, anonymized level, and so on. It is rather expensive, so it shouldn't necessarily be free for all data.
Okay, Jana, you are nodding in Finland, but what do you think about this open issue? Should we emphasize the open, or should we emphasize the green word?
Both. I think the open data, if it's not reusable data as such don't have so much value, but when it's enriched and used in services, then it can be reused as well. So then it has a huge value. So maybe you're thinking more in terms of in well-functioning data markets for open data. There are different data holders, different roles, service providers, and we need to create those well-functioning data markets. And then, of course, when we talk about responsible use of data, we think about human centricity, also this climate impact of processing data, and then being proactive in communicating about what you do with your data. And I think that here public sector can show example opening up data for common good.
Yeah. Okay, so at least public data should be open and free. Jana, you said we need well-functioning data markets, but what does that take?
I think the regulation is one part. Of course, we need to work on the regulation, but also on voluntary data sharing agreements. So there are also these, ecosystems that build those services. They can agree on common rules, and this what we are introducing is this concept of fair data economy rule book, where different parties agree on the common rules. But then, of course, you always need to work according to the regulation, so that's not an option. There should need lots of regulatory reforms, and I think we are still, the data economy is a new policy area, and so is, I think, still circularity and this green twin transition. So we definitely need to work on the regulation, but there's lots of things that we can do inside the ecosystems for data sharing as well.
So Jana, do you agree with the recommendations saying that we need to establish a national independent organization with cross-sectoral expertise, and that we need to set overall green public procurement targets at a national level? Is that something that can sort of drive the development forward?
Yeah, that was a very long sentence, but
I know, but the report is even longer.
I know, I've read it. Yes, I agree, and I think this cross-industry expertise, private companies, advising on the government, public agencies. I think we need to. There's been quite good track record in public-private collaboration in the Nordic countries. We should intensify those efforts, because I think technology advances so fast, and also the complexity. We can't really master that in our public sector silos or in private sector silos either.
Lea?
Yeah, I'm just thinking this is the SDG week, so maybe we should also try to make a perspective to a broader perspective and developing world, because I see a conflict, and this is maybe not me being a nearest person, maybe just as a person interested in the world, where if we have a market for data, we actually is going to be in a situation where we're going to leave people behind, because we are in a situation where if you try to do climate adaptation in very in countries that like on the high impact of climate change, then it can be really difficult to do that and do welfare economic optimal climate adaptation, because we don't have data. We don't know like how much are the sea level going to rise actually. So how high should the sea level wall actually be? This is to put it very concrete, but that's just for clarification.
Yeah.
So I can see a conflict. We need to think about how can we overcome that gap that we are in a developed world where we can actually have an idea that we could have a market for data, but we also have another part of the world where people won't be able to have access to that market actually. Or maybe it's two different data pools we're talking about, but I just see some conflict.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that if we in the Nordic region and in the Baltics, very well developed countries are struggling to get these data sets right, then where does that leave, the least or the less developed countries, where you actually need maybe the data the most, because they are more clear some of the climate changes are having an impact there, which is not comparable to what we see here, which is heavy rain and then that's it.
And it's maybe just a comment, but
No, I agree with that. So did you comment on that discussion on whether we should have standards in the EU, or whether we should, begin with the Nordic region, maybe the Baltics, try to develop some common standards here, or should we, begin with the national level as the report suggests?
At all levels, of course, we should go for standards on the European level. That will serve,
because that will actually give entrepreneurs and startups access to a European pool. I mean, clearly that bears a lot of potential.
Yeah, for sure, and that is also something that the EU Commission is pushing forward through these European digital innovation hubs, where we are focusing in on how we can share data, make standards, improve, qualify digital competences on businesses. So for sure.
So what are the hurdles and the obstacles on the way
to
making European standards? Because it's, as you just mentioned, the water plant example here in Denmark, and I like that because it's very tangible and makes it easy to understand. So if that's an issue in Denmark, what would it look like on a European level? I mean, there must be quite a lot of hurdles on the way.
I believe there is, and it is. To be honest, it's difficult for me to go into that discussion. We can have it on a national DK level. On European level, I find it hard to discuss. But for sure, the legal framework can create a pull towards and the need for having data. Because if we can make a business case on delivering a data-driven service, there will automatically be a pull for having access to those data, and that will create a market for a data platform. We can look towards the Netherlands, where they actually are quite far ahead in making such. They call it the trusted data sharing environment, where they make a trusted legal framework to share data, and also technically wise, cybersecurity wise, it's a trusted environment where you can share your data. And here we are also thinking into having a democratic approach. So the democratic paradigm on each provider of data could actually have a say in how their data should be used and for which purposes. So the idea could be that if I, as a personal individual, share my data on this platform, I can actually log in with my NemID and have a say on, okay, I would like to share my data for the green transition, but not for having ads on new washing machines and whatnot, or yeah.
Okay, so that's really interesting if you can sort of label your data
exactly.
and try to say in what way you'd like them to be used. Leah, if we had some European standards, and I know we're looking quite far ahead here, would that be usable to a company like NIAS? Can you see it would be of interest to you to have data from Europe as a potential business case or, yeah?
Yeah. Yes, that would be the short answer. Definitely, because there will be many similarities in data. Now we're talking like any kind of data, right? Like whatever.
I mentioned wastewater,
exactly.
electricity.
But then you can draw from experience and you can create models based on data from other settings that might more likely what you need to develop, and you can. That would be definitely be interesting, and especially the one where if you had, you can make sure that the quality is high of the data you get, but also that the data is maintained. Exactly. So yeah.
Yeah. So Jana, just a quick word on the European standards. Clearly there are many hurdles and obstacles on the way, but where are the biggest obstacles, as you see it, for European standards on this within this issue?
Maybe there's a little bit to choose. Okay, we need both. We need to have technical standards, but we need to have also this semantic interoperability and data-related standards. So maybe the focus has been a little bit too much on the technology and infrastructure side, and we need to raise the awareness for data-related topics as well. If we want to create those data markets or data spaces, we were hearing about data lake solutions. So these federated data infrastructures that are available from different countries, how we compile and how we bring together those. And I think what I'm very interested about is that how we succeed, make the data space for twin transition. And if we as the Europeans work for definition or defining or standards for the twin transition data space, could we maybe from there find a way to promote standardization efforts that help even us in the Nordics and Baltics? So there's so many things happening in the Europe at the moment that we should be very active there and look closely through what we can get from there and learn from there.
Okay, so what you're saying is we need not only the data, not only the technical part of it, but we also need the context and maybe the translation for us to be able to understand in other parts of Europe, what was the context that these data were generated?
Yeah, I think the common glossary and semantics are crucial.
Yeah.
Are crucial if we want to achieve this interoperability.
Yeah. Søren, so the work you do at Sensor Denmark, could that be used for any data? Could you translate the data coming from Holland, from any European country?
Not directly, because the energy systems and the legal frameworks are different. So the end solution that you are targeting may be different.
Yeah.
But of course, to some extent, data can be used across borders.
Yeah. But it does take some work, take some effort.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So I think maybe we should see if we have a few questions coming from the audience, and then maybe we can take a final round afterwards. So if you have any questions, now is the time. Yeah, go ahead. The microphone is coming.
Hello, Charlotte Koch for Green Architecture. It's a question from an understanding point of view to Søren. You mentioned you want to heat up the schools in the night. Are you only talking about in the winter, or have you considered that due to global warming we will not have a heating problem in future, but a cooling problem?
Yeah, so for sure, if we have a warm summer, it could be cooling of the buildings during nighttime. It was just an example that when... Sorry?
So this is not just about summer anymore. It's already partly in spring and in autumn as well. That's the reason for my question.
But I guess electricity can be used for any, I mean,
it's cooling or heating,
cooling or heating.
it really doesn't matter. The idea is that we should consume when we have zero CO2 in the electricity. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Well, let me just take a final round where we sort of look at the way ahead. Jana, what's keeping us from this agenda? What are the road or the roads ahead as you see them?
We still work too much in silos, and we don't learn enough from each other. So I think there's a little bit too much, like, although we are sometimes very good in doing this public-private partnership projects and learn from public sector to learn from private sector, but I think that should be done a lot more. And also, Nordic countries are very high in trust, but if we want to enable data sharing and use data create multiple use cases based on same data sets or combined data sets, there needs to be these trust ensuring mechanisms related to data, new organizational cultures, technology related. There are privacy concerns from the consumers. And then we should make this green data much more relevant to individuals. So consumer point of view. So finding those ways how we can make data more relevant for individuals and consumers, us as citizens. Maybe that's a my data approach. Maybe that's what we were talking about, like people having more control on the data. So I think transferring this public sector data, statistical data, register data into the more meaningful data by combining it with your personal preferences, your life situation, your life events, also promotes the change in our living habits and makes the world more sustainable.
Okay. So, Jana, she summarized a great deal of concerns, but do you have anything to add?
No, I really much agree. We work too much in silos, and then I also like to emphasize that it actually requires a lot of effort to get these data into play in the Danish business industry.
Yeah.
We can see that some of the work we do together with our Danish TSO Energinet, we are actually putting a lot of hours into supporting companies in how they should use these data, because they are available. Who can use it?
Yeah.
It's not a magnet. So if you put data for disposal, we don't. It's not a magnet. Companies is not coming by itself. So we need to go out and say, hey, we can help you how to use these data and facilitate a innovation process with them. Yeah. So I think we should bridge towards business hubs where we can facilitate innovation sprints together with businesses.
Okay. Leah, a final word from you, looking at the road ahead.
Yeah, well, I very much agree with these two, luckily. But I very much like the one Jana said, learn from each other. And then I think I'm going to go back home and like tell my colleagues that we should enable data. When we have data, we have to share them. Sharing is caring. If it's for sale or not, then that we can discuss.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, all the three of you. It's been a pleasure. Jana Sinipur joining us from Finland.
That's a question.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Quick. I think we just need the microphone because then Jana can hear the question.
Thank you. So in regards to data, we've been talking about a lot on a European and a national scale. But I'm thinking that solving the climate crisis, especially in developing countries, is also important and isn't something people can do alone. So I've been thinking, are there also initiatives in place or plans to share data on a global scale between countries internationally across the world and create standards, not only in Europe, but across many countries, and to share that data with countries that maybe are in greater need of it than just Denmark and the local area?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe Leah, that's one for you.
It's a difficult question. I'm not. I think we should have the lady from the World Bank might be
afraid
better
she left.
described. Yeah, she left. But I think there are at some scale there are some like radar photos and stuff like that. IPCC definitely have some of the data, but I think I'm not that much aware of it, and we could definitely do better. On that, and it's a good idea, and the more we talk about it, maybe it becomes a reality at some point.
So we have a dilemma there. The ones that needs the data the most, they have the least data. So we have to conclude now. Jana Sinipuro, thank you very much for joining us from Finland. Now it's the second time that I thank you, but anyway, it's heartfelt. Søren Skov Bording also joining us here on stage in Copenhagen, and Lea Ravnkilde Møller. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your patience.
Tak til Nynne Bjerre og panelet på scenen, og tak til Nordisk Ministerråd. Nu holder vi igen en kort pause på 10 minutter, og så er vi tilbage med en ny debat, som er arrangeret af Nordic Circular Hotspot, som sætter fokus på cirkulær økonomi. Vi er tilbage igen kl. 15.